I was reading this article talking about 10 reasons why, or I guess how, the middle class will essentially evaporate in the United States. And I totally agree with some of those, really all those reasons, right? If you're talking about home ownership being a key factor, retirement, or the unavailability to retire, to buy a home, right? To do premium upgrades for housing, to increase your equity, to buy organic or specialty foods, especially to combat raising concerns with illnesses, cancers, things of that nature, taxes, wellness. So, gyms and membership plans, streaming services is another reason, right? Is another thing. I've seen like Spotify, YouTube, things of that nature kind of increase. People use Amazon Prime. One of the other big ones is, insurance plans, right? Home insurance plans, which is tied to housing or home ownership. And then more importantly, medical insurance, which is tied to, I guess, health and wellness. So a lot of these factors is going to, depreciate and, put to a null the already evaporating middle class in the United States. So by household size, the income my wife and I was making, and the locations we were living, I was considered, basically upper middle class. And I felt like I was low middle class, if not even in the middle class, right? Even us getting to, for just full transparency, us getting to being able to gross close to $200,000 going into 2025, guys, or really going to this year before we made our adjustment to leave the States. I didn't see a future for myself in America, from a financial base or from a possibility to where I could combat the evaporation of my status, guys. I bought 2 houses, right? And I want to be as transparent as possible, right? I feel like, before I get to my point or what I was gonna say, I feel like home ownership is a big thing. It's the best thing to do, or at least it was, and I'm gonna say why. It was one of the most simplest ways, as a means of transactions, or as a means of, grasping. It wasn't, necessarily a dream to be able to purchase a home. You work, you save a coin or so, you have decent credit, and you could buy a house, and that house would appreciate over time, right? There'll be dips, but just within the last, 80, 90, years or so, homes always appreciated, at a rate of like 2 to 3% per year, like on lower. We've seen different states appreciate higher, double than that, over the last decade or so. So homes would appreciate, right? So you would buy a home at 25, 30, or 35, and by the time you retire, or right before you retire, you would, you would have your house paid off, right? So now it's an investment, right? You want, or stability to retire, right? That's part of your retirement. Now you're not having to make an extra $2,000 to $3,000 a month if your mortgage was, that high, or, now you can rent it out and turn it into an investment, right? You could be the lender, right? Like you can develop equity, you can develop some sort of generational wealth, even in scale for just, people who want a primary residence, right? So the house was big, man. Having a mortgage, or a rent attached to living keeps people working. Simply as that, keeps people working, especially if that cost is, a third to half of your income. It keeps people working. People can't retire because of rent and mortgages, especially in the States. So me, I bought 2 homes because I wanted to do that. I wanted to start that. If I was to stay in the States, my wife and I, we would continue to gather different single family and or, look for different ways to get, apartment units for rent, right? Because one, we wouldn't be greedy landlords. We would give people places to live, And two, we would want to start that trend, being Black Americans living in the States. Ownership combats inflation, being the owner, being the lender. There's different tax credits you get for owning a home, right? You could turn it into a long-term investment or short-term investment. You could just turn around and sell your house and then recuperate net proceeds, right? Clear debts, raise credit, and to do the process over and over again, right? So that was what we were going to do staying in the States. But the rental market is not doing as great because at the end of the day, people can't afford places, right? Whether they've been working for 5 years, 5 days, or 50 years, people can't afford places. So, I've noticed that shift, and that was a big reason why we wanted to leave the States. So it's really knowing shifts, economic shifts, is really noticing when the tide is turning, And so the future that I wanted to be in the States, outside of all the economic and societal woes that would continue to happen, the day-to-day traumas, the aggressive combativeness I had to do to survive, especially being a Black American, it wouldn't work for me and my family, It wouldn't. When I see that people, even though you can control your situation, when I see that the average person, right, or the average household, who makes $200,000 to $300,000 a year, still living paycheck to paycheck, or still dependent on that job for a means of living, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't make sense, right? So I look at all that stuff, guys, and it's like, how do you pivot? How do you pivot? It's like insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, even though someone else is telling you it's going to change. You gotta, everything's situational, everything's subjective, and everybody has their own life to live, But it is, guys. I mean, you guys tell me in the comments, you guys let me know, it's disappearing, right? The future in America isn't great for a substantial amount of people. I won't fully generalize it. I'm not going to do that to you guys, watching this. But, there's a lot of things you got to have in line to sustain yourself. And there's a lot of things you got to ignore to live in the U.S. Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you just now found my channel. Talk to y'all later.